Okay, now that we have covered how to draw shapes and edit out the strokes, I think it's just a great time to look into color. So when you look at the stroke function in here, to edit out this color, you can see that I put 3 values. So right now, these 3 values, they're represented by the default color representation for P5, which is called RGB. So basically what RGB stands for is red, green, and blue. And you can generate colors by using RGB when you are adding up the values of red, green, and blue. So by changing the redness, greenness, and blueness of a pixel, you can achieve the whole rainbow, which is quite nice. And of course, the smaller values of RGB, they're going to give you black, and the larger values within the RGB, they're going to get you to white. So the very first input in the stroke function, it stands for redness, and it's at its maximum value, which is 255. And green and blue are right now 0. That's why I'm able to achieve pure red. But if I add a bit of a green, then I get this orangish color, and a bit of a blue. Doesn't make much difference, but maybe a bit more. I'm able to get it more of a pinkish. So what is so nice about RGB is that it is somewhat of an intuitive. You kind of know that, when you're mixing out these colors, what you're going to get. And it's a very convenient way to represent the color. Another thing you can do is calling the color mode. So in the case that you don't really want your RGB to start from 0 to 255, I can just call my color mode RGB 100. Now I'm setting the maximum value possible for RGB to 100. So when I run this, I'm just going to get pure white because that's the maximum value possible. And why do we want to actually edit out, the maximum and minimum values of these colors, if you ask? This is actually allowing us to map values easily. So, for instance, right now I know that my canvas width, it is 400. But because I'm going from like negative to positive, it's going 200. So if I map it to 200 and then get my mouse X position like this, I'm able to change the value of redness by just moving my mouse. And this is something you can play around with and you can think about when you're creating your projects. Because sometimes 255, it's not a very convenient number and you can edit it out. Aside from RGB, another way to represent color is HSB, which stands for Hue, Saturation, Brightness, or HSL, Hue, Saturation, Lightness. And so I found this infographic about HSB and HSL and its differences, and I think it's a great way to explain it. So let's go one by one. You can see that both of these representations, they have hue inside them. And hue, it basically is the color of the rainbow, and you're able to go around the hue wheel and pick up whatever you need to pick up. As for the saturation, that is the richness of color. It's basically how much pigment you're adding, how blue is your blue, how green is your green. It's the richness, the amount of color you have. What is a bit tricky between these two systems is value and lightness. So for value, how far from black it is. So if your value is 0, it means that the power of that color is 0 and this is going to be black. And as you go higher and higher, you're actually getting your color brighter and it is getting better. And so what we can think about is that when you're lowering value, you're adding black, and when you're increasing value, you're removing black from this color representation. However, when it comes to lightness, it's how much light you have, and you see that the maximum value of light, it all saturates within white. What you're doing is when you're increasing lightness, you're adding white. But when you're decreasing lightness, you're removing white. You're not adding black. And I think this is a good way to sort of mentally represent and understand this concept. So if I change my color mode to HSL, let's just start from 255 and I run it, nothing much happens because my values are a bit dark. So maybe let's set this up to a bit brighter, and then lightness, just a bit of a light. Now we said I'm able to get this beautiful neon green. And let me just show how the adding light changes this. So you see, eventually I come and I reach white. But if I had this thing as HSB, you see that it just stops at green. It never turns into white. And for me to actually be able to turn this into white, I need my value to be at maximum, but I also need my saturation to be at minimum. So if we go hue, saturation, and now this is where I'm able to get it into white. So I hope this actually sort of illustrates these ideas of color representation a bit better. Now that we are done with this, I also want to show you the other thing called alpha. So if I go back into RGB, which is just going to be the default mode. Okay, maybe for now, let's set this to 100. Yeah, so I have my stroke. I can also edit the transparency of this by introducing a fourth number that is called alpha. So for RGB representations, alpha goes from 0 to 255. So if I add something like 5, it gets a bit more fade. Let me just max this up so you can actually see the difference a bit better. And if I go a bit smaller, like 1, it just gets fainter. It's almost not there, and it's becoming more and more transparent, showing me what is behind this elliptical weird donut. And then maximum alpha, it is just its full richness and being able to see everything. And I will definitely say by decreasing the alpha and editing out, you can create very cool effects, which we're probably going to go through in some of the exercises so you can get to play around with it more. Another thing is that if we actually have our color mode for either HSL or HSB, so let's go to HSL. Okay, maybe I'll set this to 50. the alpha, it becomes a bit more different. The range of alpha is a bit smaller for HSL and HSV values, so even when I go to 1, it makes no difference. So I need, because the alpha for these representations, it is notated in between 0 and 1. So if I make it way smaller, now it's starting to get fainter and a bit more fainter. Or maybe not. Yeah, you have to go very small with this. So that's it. That's how you add transparency into your color and images.